If we're going to get straight into it, we will be discussing the offensive MVP of the AFC. So I'm going to go division by division, as I said, for each award, discuss the nominees from that division, and then, sort of pick an overall winner. So starting with the AFC East, there actually wasn't too many offensive weapons when you think about the Jets, the Patriots, and even the Dolphins this year. So it really only left one team to give us their candidate. And it was a 50-50 really between Stephon Diggs and Josh Allen. It's always tough in a great quarterback wide receiver duo. Is it more the throwing or is it more the catching? But in this certain combination, no disrespect to Josh Allen, but I'm going with Stephon Diggs as the AFC East offensive MVP, and therefore he is my first nominee for the AFC MVP. He had the most receptions in the league with 127, most receiving yards with 1,535, third most first downs of any receiver, and in my opinion, he was the third best receiver in the league this year behind Devontae Adams and Tyreek Hill. He just did it all really. If you watch them, similar in the way Devontae Adams does it, and also Michael Thomas of last year used to do it, the defenses basically know he's getting the ball, but they just can't really stop it. And with the other talent they had on that Bills offense, they couldn't really triple team him, and that was enough for him to basically dominate every single match he played in. He turned into one of the signings of the year, but we'll talk about that towards the end of the episode. He is certainly in the conversation for that one, coming from Minnesota last year. And yeah, he's always shown potential, but in a two wide receiver dominant system with Adam Thielen, he was always, not necessarily the secondary player, but Thielen often stole the headlines when he could have been, in the headlines the whole time if he was just on his own. He was playing that well. But I think now he's gone to Buffalo, a team that historically hasn't had the greatest of offenses in the last, 15 to 20 years. And he's really stolen the show, and I think he's elevated Josh Allen's game to the next level. Josh Allen has a lot of raw talent, but I think he needed some skill around him to really turn him into a top 10, top 6 quarterback in the league, and I think he's done that in my opinion. But yeah, honourable mention to Josh Allen. In my rankings, I had him finishing as the 6th best quarterback of the year, which is certainly no mean feat. I think it's his 3rd year, so it's pretty impressive to think how good he's going to become. But yeah, for me, Stephon Diggs is the offensive MVP candidate from the AFC East. Moving on to the AFC North, I've gone with Nick Chubb. It's actually another one where this was kind of tough. There weren't too many outstanding candidates in this division, but I went with Nick Chubb, 3rd most yards per game of any running back in terms of rushing, 4th most rushing yards per attempt, 2nd most out of RBs. I think Kyler Murray and Lamar Jackson had more, but that's not really a fair comparison. He averaged a rushing TD every game he played. He only played 12 matches, had 12 rushing touchdowns, and he had the 7th most rushing yards in the whole league, and that is with only playing 12 matches. So I'm not really taking into account that he only played 12 matches, as that's kind of unfair to the guys who played all the matches because it's not their fault he missed time. But yeah, pretty incredible year from Nick Chubb. I remember at the start of this year when we were on with Pilch, he, regular guest on the show, he said that he thinks Nick Chubb was one of the most underrated offensive players after last year. And when we were talking about the NFL Top 100, he reckons he was like a top 20 player in his opinion. And I think he definitely showed that this year. He's probably, if you gave everyone the same amount of carries with the same O-line, I think Nick Chubb would come out with the best results, if I'm honest. I think he is the best quality rusher in the league. That's a big call, and I'm not sure if it's completely true, but that's just my gut feel. Absolute star. And him, along with his good mate, Kareem Hunt, obviously Baker Mayfield had a pretty good year after a tumultuous 2019, but they are really the reasons why the Browns had such a good season, and especially at the back end of it. So Nick Chubb is the AFC North Offensive MVP nomination, in my opinion, but honourable mention goes to Kareem Hunt. He was right by Nick Chubb's side most game and wasn't far behind in most stats. The AFC South, this division was actually stacked this year. Last year, I don't think it was as good, and this year there was a lot of standout performances, but we all know who the AFC South Offensive MVP nominee is, and that's Derrick Henry. Most rushing yards in the NFL for the second year in a row, I believe. Maybe third year. I think it was just second year. He had over 2,000 yards, which was, I think, 500 yards ahead of the next best. Most rushing yards per game in the NFL, most rushing touchdowns, most rushing first downs. So, he couldn't really break any more stats if he tried. Yes, he got more volume than I think any other running back. He had a lot of attempts, but that's not his fault when he's running as well as he is. Why wouldn't you keep giving him the ball? So I think that's a fair call to make him the AFC South Offensive MVP nominee. The honourable mentions for this is a long list. You got Ryan Tannehill had another great year. Deshaun Watson, he had the most passing yards of the season. Jonathan Taylor had a very impressive year in his first year in the NFL. AJ Brown broke out as we were expecting after a strong debut season last year. James Robinson was an absolute shock of an undrafted rookie. He had a great year. Phillip Rivers was another good one, and Brandon Cooks, just to round out that list, all had very impressive years in the AFC South. It was a pretty impressive division this year, even if teams like the Texans and Jags didn't have the best record. And then to finish it off, the AFC West Offensive MVP. I can't lie, I was actually tempted to give this to Tyreek Hill, but you can't really not go with Patrick Mahomes, can you? 3 game-winning drives, 3 fourth-quarter comebacks, most passing yards per game, second most passing yards in total. Just another freak year from P. Mahomes. Going to be interesting to see if he wins the MVP. I'm not sure if he will. I'll talk about that in the NFC episode as well. Him and Rodgers are neck and neck, not really in my opinion, but in most people's opinion, I think. But yeah, Mahomes, he looks like he's going to be a star in this league for a long time now. There are a few people questioning whether it was maybe just an early career fluke, but he's shown us, I think, 3 years in a row now, so I don't think we can say that anymore. And he's just a star-studded quarterback that we can start to expect this really every year. So yeah, he had another absolute freak year. Honourable mentions here go to Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, Darren Waller, and even Josh Jacobs. They all had pretty impressive years. So if we're going to look at those nominees, we've got Stephon Diggs, Chubb, Henry, and Mahomes. I think Chubb's the clear 4th out of that. And then I'm going to have to say Diggs is probably the number 3, just by, I know it's harsh, but just by virtue of being a wide receiver, they're usually less important in games. I'm sure I'm offending a lot of people there, but I think it's hard not to go with P. Mahomes. Yes, Derrick Henry was by far the most dominant running back, and next to probably Dalvin Cook, there wasn't really anyone else even close to the conversation there. I think I'm going to have to go with Patrick Mahomes just because the impact he had on the Chiefs this year, likely going to lead them to another Super Bowl. We'll see that in about a week's time. And also just the quarterback position. Yes, it annoys me how much importance is put on it, especially in terms of MVP awards, but it does make sense. They do touch the ball every single play, unlike any other position, so it is by far the most important position on the field. So I think it's fair. Patty Mahomes wins the AFC Offensive MVP award. So without further ado, I think I say that almost every episode, but I reckon we get straight into it, starting with the Offensive MVP. Once again, like yesterday's episode, I'm going to go division by division and use that as sort of a nominee sort of situation. So we'll start with the NFC East Offensive MVP. I can't lie, there weren't too many options in this division. Definitely the weakest division in the NFL this year. But the Offensive MVP candidate for me is Amari Cooper. Given the catastrophe of a year it was for Dallas and they're changing quarterbacks with Dak's injury, Andy Dolan also got injured, so you had to deal with Ben DiNucci, and I actually forget the other bloke's name, but there was another guy who played one game. So he dealt with 4 different quarterbacks throughout the season. He still performed to a pretty high level, in my opinion. I have him finishing as the 17th best wide receiver for the year, which is probably about where we would have him at the start. Maybe we would have thought he would finish a little bit higher than that, but if you knew Dak was going to be injured from about week 5 onwards, you'd maybe cut him some slack. So I think he had a pretty impressive year, just given all those moving parts. 11th in receptions in the NFL, 14th in receiving yards. So I think Amari Cooper did his best in a struggling team, and I think can't be too many complaints with his performances this year. So he's the offensive MVP candidate from the NFC East, in my opinion. Moving on to the NFC North, this is a completely different story here. We are spoilt for choice, but the clear standout is Aaron Rodgers. There could be a case for Devontae Adams, as in my opinion he was the best wide receiver, but a number one wide receiver versus in my opinion, a top two. I don't want to spoil it, so I'll say a top two quarterback. It's tough to pick the wide receiver there. So I'm going with Aaron Rodgers. Most passing TDs for the year, best completion rate of anyone who had over 150 attempts, least interceptions of anyone who started at least 15 games. So pretty incredible year from him. I can't lie, I thought he was maybe on the decline in his career after the 2019 year. And in saying that, he still probably had a top 10 year, but probably was just outside that top 5. But he came back with vengeance this year, and in my opinion, he was the best quarterback on the season. Honourable mentions do have to go to Devontae Adams, like I said. 18 receiving touchdowns, over 1,300 yards. He was the number one wide receiver in, I think, everyone's opinion. Also worth mentioning, Dalvin Cook had another cracking year, probably finished as the running back 2 behind Henry. And then Justin Jefferson, David Montgomery, Aaron Jones, Adam Thielen, Allen Robinson, and Kirk Cousins all had pretty impressive years. So I think they all deserve a mention. Moving on to the NFC South, another division that is fairly stacked, nothing compared to the NFC North in terms of individual talent. But I've actually gone with a strange one here. I reckon most people would have Kamara or Brady, but I've actually gone with Calvin Ridley. We predicted his breakout at the start of the season on this podcast, and he did certainly do that. His season was messed around a little bit with Julio Jones being injured for a lot of it. He was also injured for some of it, but he ended the year 13th in receptions, 6th in receiving yards, top 10 in receiving touchdowns, and he was also 4th in yards per game. So when he was on the park, he was one of the better wide receivers in the competition. I had him finishing as the 5th receiver, that's including tight ends. I had Kelsey as the number 4. So realistically, Adams the number 4 wide receiver on the season, which is pretty impressive considering Atlanta didn't have the most successful of seasons. So he's probably an outside call, but I'm going to pick him as my NFC South candidate for the offensive MVP of the NFC. Honourable mentions got to go to Tom Brady. I have Tom Brady as my QB5 on the year, so for the QB5 to miss out on a divisional MVP, that's pretty rare, so condolences to him, I guess, not that he gives a crap where I rank him. Then Kamara, I had him as the RB3 as well, so he also very unlucky to miss out, and then Mike Evans and DJ Moore both had pretty good years in their respective teams. Then finally, the NFC West. This is probably an interesting one. I think at week 10, you would have laughed if someone said this award wouldn't go to Kyler Murray or Russell Wilson, but in fact, they actually weren't too high in my final standings. I think they both missed out on the top 10, if I'm honest, so definitely, I don't know if that's a consensus opinion, but in my opinion, they definitely fell away later in the year. So I'm actually going to give the offensive MVP to DK Metcalf. He finished 7th in receiving yards, 9th in receiving touchdowns. He was just a force all year. It's pretty hard to contain someone that big and that fast. I think Jalen Ramsey's probably the only guy who could do it. I can't remember anyone else really putting much of a lockdown job on him. And yeah, he was just impressive all year. Him and Tyler Lockett are probably, I'm just saying this off the top of my head, so don't shoot me, but they're probably the best 1-2 wide receiver combo coming out of this season, you'd have to say. And then combined with Russell Wilson, it's tough to see Seattle going too far south in terms of ability in the next few years. So it's going to be interesting to see how DK Metcalf's progression goes, because I thought he had an outstanding year this year. Honourable mentions do go to Tyler Lockett, as I mentioned before. He had a killer year, and then also DeAndre Hopkins and Robert Woods for Arizona and the Rams respectively both had really good years. So some interesting nominees there. I can't lie, it's not that close. Like, let's be real, Amari Cooper's not winning the offensive MVP of the NFC. Neither is DK Metcalf. Neither is Calvin Ridley. So they all had very good, impressive years, but pretty far from Aaron Rodgers, and it's fair to say Devontae Adams, if he was in another division, would probably be the clear number 2 candidate for this award. So, and even Dalvin Cook would probably be number 3. So big year for the NFC North. Massive year for Aaron Rodgers. And he is my NFC offensive MVP. And just a little side note, I have him above Mahomes. So he is actually my NFL MVP for the year. So well done, Aaron Rodgers. Mr. Dilf. I don't know if he is a Dilf. He gives off Dilf vibes, I reckon. But the good-looking rooster from Green Bay, he had an absolute blinder of a year with Matt LaFleur. Their offensive schemes were pretty much unrivaled all season, and they sadly stumbled on the final hurdle like they did last year at the NFC Championship game. But I'm sure they'll be back next year, hopefully with a few more wide-out talent in Aaron Rodgers' opinion, I'm sure.
Queensland! It's a miracle! Oh, yeah! What about that one? Unbelievable! Balotelli! Aguero! Crowd cheers. Here's Siddle.